Therian said they felt more akin to an animal. I think it was a bat, is what they mentioned.
Otto.
Yeah. And more people chimed in, and it just, the community kind of rolled into a support group for wares at the time, is the term we went by. Now it's Therian, as language evolves.
Like how gay used to mean happy.
Yeah. Then we actually had the first howl, we call it, which is like a gathering camp out. Happened in '94, where other Therians actually got together, met each other for the first time, and developed the community even more. And we've been having regular meetups throughout the years in different parts of the U.S. to build that community, get to know each other better, offline as well as online, and grow the community, support, and become good friends, and even some people become families, or like family, we're so close. It depends on the Therian though.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna marry everyone we meet.
No.
Those things. Anyway, wow.
I'd say kind of actually to tie two questions back together. These experiences are very sensitive to us. It can be hard to open up to other people about what we have experienced. So if we have memories that we feel like maybe aren't typical or things like that, or are traumatic for us, it can be hard to open up. But I think it's important to at least give the community a chance. Again, there are so many branches of the community, so many different personality styles.
It's about as diverse as New York City.
Yes. So
if you don't fit in one place, you may fit in another.
It's like a giant jigsaw,
whatever.
You never know what niche is out there.
So, take the time. What I like to do, I have written a very extensive journal. Sometimes it's babble, sometimes it's very important things that I think people will get some information from. But it surprises me that even some minuscule things that I think, okay, I'm going to sound really crazy for even writing about this. And then I get, I get some responses that are like, hey, I've been thinking about writing about this too. I've experienced this, so it's kind of nice. People will find that camaraderie. So it's hard to open up, but try to find that place where you feel like you can, because you working through some of those things may help other people work through their things too. So.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to things like, I've actually gone alone for much of my, I suppose, Therian / Otherkin status. Like I haven't been outwardly seeking any advice or anything, no help, but that's changed ever since I met a couple people, got out there. But I feel that, even if you feel like you can do it by yourself, but it might take longer, it really does pay to have other people help you out, because sometimes it just takes an outside eye to see what you can, I guess.
If you have a viewpoint.
If you go it alone,
exactly.
It's almost like an echo chamber
like,
of sorts. Like you kind of get locked into your own thought patterns and things like that too. So the external perspective is very helpful.
Yeah.
Again, most of my experience, I didn't even have the internet until I was 19. So growing up, I was raised in a Christian household, and again, I misunderstood a lot of things about even that experience too. So I thought that my therianthropy was like this kind of possession or some kind of demonic thing that was inside me. It was horrifying. It would be very. We've seen some teenagers and some even adults that have come in and have kind of felt that way too. And just realizing that there's another community that has this experience. No, you're not crazy. No, you're not demonic. Anything like that. Like it helps tremendously. It really does help to try to find that community and to not isolate yourself. Some of the things that we go through are already tough enough.
Wow. Yeah. It's pretty childish.
I noticed that a lot of, one thing, talking point I have on here is Therians and furry. A lot of people can confuse it, like they lump them both together, and they can go hand in hand. A lot of Therians are in the furry community because of the cons and the acceptance, and
It seems like a given at this point.
yeah,
even though it's not always the
have
case.
that animal common ground. And like I said, going to the cons and stuff, it's all easy to plan as well. It's like another like an indoor camp out. And you can, maybe other furries can relate. I've talked to some furries that they're like, maybe I do lean towards Therian, and they open up about it when you open up to each other and share that experience.
To me, I've found furry to be almost like a medium for communication. So again, I talked about when I was a kid, I felt there was this gap between me and what seemed like normal human social structure, and communicating was really hard for me. And I didn't find out about the wear community until much later. I actually found furry first. And I'm like, this is awesome because these are animal people too. It wasn't exactly the same thing, but it was a way for me to express myself in like an animalistic sort of way to people that people were able to relate to. So it's like I could be the animal, they could be the human, and there was a bridge there. So I found that very important for me personally.
And also with the like the dysphoria and the shifting stuff, I found a lot of Therians, the way they experience fursuiting in the furry fandom. Hey!
I have a
Welcome.
schedule that says this starts at 2, and then
Oh.
I found out
Oh
this.
boy. Oh,
Easy.
easy. All right, we haven't gotten too deep into it. It's
Oh my
okay.
God.
And that was the panel. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, that was goodbye. Yeah.
You did great.
Alright. Okay, we covered,
We
basically covered a lot of
Therians.
Therian stuff.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
If you want to talk a little bit about Otherkin.
I can help start us off if she doesn't know how.
Anything you need to set up, or?
There's nothing I need to set up. I'm just rattled. I should have checked to make sure that I was not looking at one of the conflicting schedules.
Oh, it's okay. I think we'll
All right.
do it fine.
Well, I guess I'll start by saying I'm Alynna. I'm a fairy fox, and this is more than a persona, actually, of course. You guys all have probably already been hearing about pretty much the difference between furry as a character identity and Therian and Otherkin as an actual personal identity.
We're actually just about to go into that. Why don't you explain?
All right then. Well, the first, sorry,
Don't worry.
I got completely screwed up and blown out by this thing.
All right.
So, first of all, I guess I'll go over the difference between Otherkin and Therianthropy, which is almost nothing, except for the fact that Otherkin is more of an umbrella for anything that you would not classify directly as an animal that you would be able to encounter in the past or the present. So, I mean, dinosaurs you would consider to be Therian, but like say, if you're talking about a fairy or a satyr or dragon, usually those are considered Otherkin. And the distinction is pretty much just, would you consider it mythological, even though if you're an Otherkin, you don't really consider yourself mythological, but other people might consider your kin type mythological.
I should also probably make one little note. For the record, furries are kind of a choice.
Yes.
And Otherkin and Therians are more like, you can't really help it. It's how you feel, it's what you are inside, and it's not necessarily a choice. Well, yeah, so
Yes.
that's a distinction to keep in mind. Furries are a choice, Otherkin and Therian are not. We can't help that we feel this way.
When we had like Therian and Anthrocon, someone said at the end of the day, furries can take their animal off and Therians cannot. So it's kind of that.
Exactly. That's good.
And it's basically the same way with Otherkin, even though you can't, or even though, let's take it from a perspective of somebody looking on the outside, they might think that this species has never existed before, quote, but from your perspective, you have existed before, and there might not be a evidence-based, scientifically grounded basis in that particular belief. But however, it's a reality to you, so that one has to ask themselves in that perspective, why do you feel that way? I mean, where does that feeling originate from? If it's just there, and it's always been there throughout your life, then there's got to be a reason for that. And if you can't, I mean,
Well,
let's say you're born, you watch things on TV, you get that kind of input, but
I was actually, I've actually been packing some potential explanations.
go ahead.
All right. Well, first of all, and by the way, some of these might sound a little discouraging, but please don't take them that way. They're not meant to be. It's just trying to help people understand themselves. For those who believe in a more psychological approach to how Therians work and Otherkin as well, one concept that might help. Sorry, I shiny things. Okay, so one thing that might contribute is, well, let's start with the memories. Okay, say you were a little kid, like too young to really understand the world that much, but still get an idea. And you have all these strange memories of, say, living in Scotland. It could be that maybe as a kid you watched a little show on TV that happened to be a documentary on Scotland, which could in turn explain why you have like all this memory of why it's like how it is. However, that is not always the case. Maybe it is a spiritual thing. I'm here to provide both psychological and spiritual methods of how this could be a thing. But I'm mostly leaning towards the science side, but I don't really have any issue with the spirituality parts either. Okay, so on one hand, it could just be a mix of memories and things that were on TV or were unusual to you as a kid at the time, things like a distorted orb. That could be one idea. And on another note, if you're thinking of how one could be this high in the back. Okay, so if you're thinking of how one could have a more spiritual sort of method of figuring out how such a thing could be, an example could be like if you had, well, who here is familiar with the concept of a multiverse? Everyone, good, I'm happy to hear that. Alright, well, a multiverse is one way. So, like, obviously, there's realms of possibility, ways that things could have gone differently, evolved differently, that kind of deal. I think we can go into that a little deeper a bit later. I just want to get a couple of things out of the way. And on yet another spiritual one, this one isn't so much an explanation, but an interesting observation. When it comes to people who believe they are dragons, or descended from dragons, or something dragons. I'm looking at you, Aaron. I'm looking at you, Aaron. You're my boyfriend there. I'm looking at him. He is obsessed. Anyway, but, moving on. Keep in mind that there might very well have been a case very similar to ours before time was truly recorded. After all, there's like the emperors of China. They believed that they were all basically part dragon, or just descended from dragons. Emperors were basically just otherkin in a different time. And then you have, let's see, who else? Well, let's not forget that Native Americans definitely had a lot of spiritual things with animals too. Maybe they had some other kin in their lives as well. But if you look around enough, you can actually find there are a number of cases, especially in things like China and Japan, from what I've looked at, that, you know, where people are like, oh, I'm descended from a fox spirit, or I'm descended from an eastern dragon, or I carry the blood of dragons in my veins. I have a feeling, in any age, we're probably not alone. So that's a thought. All right, I think that's everything, but I could be wrong. I'll let you know if I remember.
I should note that the first artistic-based evidence of humans thinking in terms of anthropomorphics is over 40,000 years ago with the lion man that they discovered in the cave in Germany. They tested that.
Furries.
Yeah, they basically, that's the first anthropological evidence of furries and it's one of the first evidences of art itself. Was 40,000 years ago, was when they carbon dated it, and it was basically this ivory statue about 6 feet high, and it was of a lion man. You could look that up on Wikipedia about how they all discovered it, and they actually were kind of shocked that humans were making any type of artistic stuff back then, because previously they didn't really think that humans were advanced enough to think in artistic terms that far back. It was just basically getting out of the trees at that point.
On the other hand, we were still really into furries even then.
Probably because we lived a lot closer to animals.
We did, so it wasn't a stretch to think, hey, let's think of ourselves like that a little bit now and then, you know. Let's see. You done?
Yeah, for the moment.
All right. Do we have any questions?
I can make a comment on the 40,000 years ago. Homo sapiens hadn't gotten into Europe at that time. And so that was probably Neanderthal, except there's a lot of anthropologists that can't stand the idea that anything but Homo sapiens could possibly produce art. So they said, they must have come here earlier.
Yeah.
Neanderthalensis.
I think there's a lot of people are just going to dispute this type of idea just because they don't like it. But I think there's a lot of evidence that shows that Neanderthals didn't die out. What happened is that the Cro-Magnon man and the Neanderthals started interbreeding.
They liked each other.
And those two, the DNA for both of these eventually resulted in what we now call Homo sapiens. So there's very likely a little bit of Neanderthal DNA in a lot of people that currently exist today. And maybe some of the attributes that we find today have some source in that DNA from the times when we had two different species that were deciding which one is going to win the war, or who's going to survive. And what happened was basically it's a truce.
Why can't we all just make like bonobos and make love?
That's pretty much, I think, what happened. But, there's a lot of people who just say the other, one wiped the other out. But I think those people just think in terms of survival of this fittest is the only law. And
we weren't particularly fit to begin with. We were just smart and lucky. Mostly lucky. Anyway.
That goes to the, we've talked before, the evidence of, both Therians and Otherkin. There's like nothing real physically or physical evidence yet, at least, or, research into it.
Well, not a lot of people want to research something that sounds like nonsense to a scientific person, but.
There are they've been at Anthrocon, the first science team, IARP, the International
Anthropomorphic Research
Project.
Program.
yeah. They're studying both furries and as an offshoot, Therians. And doing, so far they've been doing, like panels and, interviews about people's individual experiences. And I'd like to see them, maybe there's some, hard to say, there may be some physical attributes to it, but time will tell. But it's good that they're researching Therians.
Well, at least someone's getting into it.
Yeah, I'm glad they are.
Me too. Be nice to make sense of it all.
It'd be nice to have, more on paper and, some actual hard research into who we are, why we are, what we are.
I don't have their,
Go ahead.
I don't have their exact website, but if you look up for science, you can actually access most of their surveys right now. Like, you don't have to be in any certain, you don't have to be at a con or anything like that. Some of their, I want to say the Therian and Otherkin survey is more of like an essay format, but some of their surveys are more like multiple choice. Of course, with the Therian and Otherkin, they want the essay format because they want to get a better idea, like a deeper understanding of what the experience actually is. It's kind of hard to do that through multiple choice answers. So
Yeah.
I saw some of their cards out there, actually, the first science cards over, they're just outside the door, a little over the left on the thing. In fact, I may even have one of them in my bag right now.
But I'd like for them to come to other cons as well to do the research and panels and, gather people's experiences. Because that itself, it helps validate what we feel as well.
Yeah.
I can kind of step in there too. So I have a mate of about 5 years now, and I've spent a long time discussing, the last year basically has been me discussing what it's like to be a Therian too. Blows his mind in some ways, and I understand that it's very difficult to kind of grasp some of this stuff. But even with me discussing these things and trying to be as logical as possible, it wasn't until he actually talked to someone with earth science and got that validation from a scientific perspective that yes, Zefer isn't crazy, it is a thing. That's when it finally clicked for him. So, it is a very tough thing that we're pushing forward to. I know, again, it's very hard for some of us to want to open up about our experiences because they may seem foreign, they may seem like something that will be pushed away for, cast aside for, or something like that. But if we don't tell our stories, it's going to stay like that too. So it's critical to kind of work with people like that to try to get a legitimate understanding of what our experience is.
Any questions?
Particularly if there's questions on other, I'll try to field it. I mean, I actually consider myself just as much Therian as Otherkin, for mostly because I have what I would call box experiences. Like, I don't know if anybody's going to identify with this, but if you ever like look at the side of the shed and feel like you should be like burrowing under in it and making like a den under there. Or if you like see a rabbit in the field and you're feeling like you want to chase it and then catch it and then
Maybe eat it.
usually not maybe.
Maybe.
But,
Watch out, rabbit furs.
yeah, I had a box panel and I invited the rabbit furs and they didn't come.
Yeah.
I wonder why.
I can't imagine why they wouldn't come. It's a mystery, we'll never know. Anyway, I'm also I'm still figuring out my kin type to this day. Again, lemurs are what feels like a thing right now. I actually got to go and meet physical lemurs and have them climb on my head, and they were really friendly. But that is a story for another day, unless people actually want to hear that. But we'll talk about that later, though. But I will say that those lemurs, I found something there, and since then I'm doing research, and you know, I'm at least a lemur for the con. So, you know, but I also am not going to deny that I felt phantom wings, and lemurs do not have wings. So I'm just like, well, whatever the heck I am, let's figure that out together, yeah? So, for those who, you know, don't know what they are, or don't have a steady clue, feel free to ask me any questions. I might be able to offer some answers, or maybe I won't be. It's definitely something to think about. At least I can give food for thought.
It's a very slow and steady process, and it seems like every Therian, I can't really speak for non-Therian Otherkins, but it seems like every Therian that I know has their own different path to go through this. As far as like experiencing wings or something like that, I know a lot of like canine and feline Therians who experience cameo ships wings. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are that type. And then one of the things that I'm kind of looking into is how does the media that you partake in, how does that kind of influence some of the experiences you get? So if you watch a lot, I'm a tiger, so if I were to watch a lot of wolf stuff, all of a sudden would I start feeling more wolfy? Would I start getting cameo ships or something like that? But to kind of get back to what I wanted to actually say, there's no need to rush through the process. It's actually good to question yourself, but not too much either. Again, I kind of went through bouts of questioning myself too much and trying to invalidate my experience. It ended up hurting me more than it helped. So just be honest with yourself. There's no one specific go-to way to figure out about this either. Sometimes we see people say, okay, you've got to research. Who in here is a scientist? Who in here researches things all the time? It's not everybody, right? So some people, it's more about the emotions they feel. Some people, it's more about the experiences they have, how they interact with the world. Some people, it's, you know, you kind of have to find your own way. And again, that's kind of, don't force yourself into a box. Don't force yourself to make any conclusions. That can actually kind of hurt you in the long run. So just slow steps, be honest with yourself, and feel things out.
I think the most important part of that is to be honest with yourself, because it's easy to start like looking at everything you might ever like to want to be, and start saying, well, I'm going to be that, and then I'm going to be that, and then where that road honestly leads is to a place where you don't really know what you are anymore, and that in itself is not a good feeling. I have honestly, I have only seen that from a outside perspective of people who have gone down, basically got into what I will call the tumbling thing, where they watch Steven Universe, and now they're a character from Steven Universe, and then soon they're listing 45 different kin types on their page, and realistically, that probably doesn't happen.
I don't know a lot of people who would have like 45 different souls or something, so it's like, maybe try and narrow it down, but not so much that you start something honest.
You don't want to do what I've done sometimes and deny something that you are for the sake of not having a lot of insights. But you also don't want to get carried away and just take every single feeling that you have and run with it, because it's very easy to be influenced by media. Now, I have a belief that media can be a trigger to discover something. Like if you're watching something and you feel a deep connection with it that makes you want to research it more, find out why you feel that way. Yes, that's a great path to go down. But you also, I believe that people have to give that process time to see if it just doesn't, like, if the interest in it drops away, then, well, there was this one concept that people were throwing around, like, a cameo ship or something like that, where you feel like you are something for a little while, and then it falls away.
Yeah, a certain amount of time.
Yes. I think that's a legitimate thing to happen to people, but that doesn't really also constitute an identity or a change of identity. You really want to try to embrace the things that you are, even if that's more than one thing, but also not try to become everything, unless you're a shapeshifter. Those actually do occur, and more often than one might think. But usually, if you're a shapeshifter, you have a base form that you're most attached to.
Something you kind of come
Yeah,
back to.
something that you kind of, because most shapeshifters don't run around with little blobs running around like this, and then shift into whatever they want.
It's not like a ditto from Pokemon.
Yes.
It's not like an amorphous blob of what am I? Oh God! But it's not that.
Usually they have bases in the species that is known for shapeshifting, like Kitsune for one,
Or
Tanuki.
you took Tanuki.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that one.
I was trying to think from some other cultures as well.
Changelings, I guess.
Changelings,
Yeah.
Something like that.
Puto.
Yeah.
Mesoamerican Nagual.
Yes. Not everyone knows about the Nagual. It's kind of like a shape-shifting sorcerer from Mesoamerica. I don't know enough about them that I would be a reliable source, but I know they turn into a lot of animals, to a degree or another. They're like, hey, I turned into a jaguar. No, they're usually not a good omen from what I've heard. But then again, when is a jaguar ever really a good thing to see in your backyard? I mean, that's just gonna eat the neighborhood chihuahua and leave.
Yeah.
It's not really a good omen for anyone except the people who hate the chihuahua. Anyway.
So I have to question what constitutes a good omen and a bad omen. These stories are written by humans. They're not written from the perspective of the creature that is being described. And humans don't have the experience of that creature that is being described.
Well, I might have one thing to note on that. When it comes to, like, say, a crow being a bad omen, I can understand that one because we know that naturally they are drawn to carrion, and therefore there's a dead thing nearby, and the killer might be around, or it was somebody new. That is something that could be it. Because I noticed that although a lot of omens, quote unquote, are usually kind of, well, ominous, I will say that a lot of them have at least some truth. At least a little bit when it comes to animal omens. Like, okay, alright, bluebirds that, that bring happiness to the house. People like seeing bluebirds. That's, of course, it brings happiness to the house. They're cute little birds.
But is there like an underlying reason why a bluebird makes you happy? What created that?
Happen to like humans. But yeah,
Yeah, humanity likes cute things.
that's what we do.
And
It's like pandas are alive.
but then I get back into my own little loop of why do humans like cute things? Maybe the cuteness, the attribute of cuteness itself is related to some type of human instinct that makes them like it.
It actually is believed to be the case, actually. Like, I found an article or something. Basically, the idea is, in a nutshell, the idea is that cuteness is like something we've learned to perceive and understand. Because basically, if we see something as cute, we kind of want to take care of it and hold it, and that's kind of just become a behavior that has been ingrained into us because that's how children need to live. They need to be cared for, and if we see things that are like, they express the same neoteny and everything, you know, with the big eyes, big head, all those disproportionate parts, and we find it cute, that's like, that's pretty much how it works. Now, as for the people such as myself who think babies are kind of weird looking, and baby animals are like perfect to look at, I don't have an answer for that. But cuteness is certainly something that helped us take care of other things that were cute. So that's basically the idea, the theory kind of anyway. It's not like a set thing, of course, but I mean, honestly, how do you measure that? But you know, that's what we got. That's best guess, best hypothesis.
One thing I'd like to bring up for each of us here at the panel is acceptance out in life. Some people kind of hide their therianthropy, and they don't want other people to know for fear of how they may react or whatnot. Myself, I have no problem letting people know that I am a Therian, and I'll explain it to them. Family, at work, doesn't matter to me. I'll feel free to talk about it. But not everyone is like that. They'll fear repercussions, being made fun of, being looked at differently. How is your otherkinness or therianthropy? How do you cope with that in real life?
Well, I guess I'll go first. The fact of the matter is, I don't really let it affect me or my life. I don't know. I mean, I still have moments where I can be like, if I get angry enough, I'll definitely have a mental shift and I'll go animal. But, well, beyond that, well, I mostly just take anger management and stuff for the whole animal mode thing, but I'm trying to think of how else I cope with it. I guess I just cope with it by trying to remain a chill, relaxed person. And when it comes to like how it affects me, the answer is it mostly doesn't until I get over it. But for the most part, it's just not very much of an effect on my life because maybe it's because I still recognize that even though I don't feel human, I still physically am human, and it feels weird and wrong, but that's okay, because honestly, I'm not alone here now, am I? And we're all weird, but I guess I just have come to accept it, and in the parts where I need to keep it under control, I seek out help for that. That's the extent of it, I think.
My answer for that is simply that I started with a fox mind, and I layered behaviors and conditioning on top of that, so that fox things would be translated into human things eventually, and then I would have a way to interact with the world. And that's, I mean, that sounds kind of like a way to deal with a psychosis, but it doesn't really, I mean, it doesn't really work that way. But at the same time, I mean, it was a conscious process to become a person that could not really deal or interact with the world. And I mean, I'm going to say straight up that my childhood was socially stunted. I didn't really talk to people in school because, well, I didn't really know what to say or how to say it. And I didn't see the usefulness of talking unless somebody was asking a question. But eventually it was like, well, in school, I never really figured out how to do it. It wasn't until I was 19. Well, I started talking to people more often in the 10th grade as I found ways to deal with it. But I didn't really know. The word Therian did not even come into my life until I was like 19. And that is 23 years ago. And I was an adult when I started figuring out that reactions that I had to things that I saw in books, like there was this one book I read when I was 16 called Owl in Love, and it was about people who turned into owls, and it was a love story really, but they eventually figured out they could live in the forest and go to school, and just have them live the life half and half that way. And that was the first point. That was the first point where I realized that maybe I feel this way because I'm not supposed to be human. And two, maybe there's a way to deal with this in such a way that I can still act like I'm a human being, and I'm stuck in this human body, but I can figure out how to work with what I have to interact with the human world. So I just started piling on, like, if somebody says hi to me, I obviously, well, I still do go give it back. But that's not what I would do if I went to work. If I went to work, there's something that's going to, in my mind, change that into, oh, hello, to somebody else. That's not my first instinct. I think that's one of the things that Therians and other kin deal with, is their first instinct is not the same instinct that a human is going to have in a situation. They're going to have to put something in the middle to make sure it comes out right. And that's sometimes why you might be talking to a Therian or another kin, and their response is delayed for a few moments, because they really do have to think of have some point where in the middle it gets put into a way that's not only human understandable, but human acceptable.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm that same way, where sometimes I have to take a few moments to translate or process what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it, rather than just growling my disapproval at someone.
Exactly. Pretty much exactly what I'm doing.
Sorry, it's myself.
It's okay.
How do you walk though?
Just for me, it's
It wants to work at you.
Yes, I like the chocobo noise as a ringtone. I find that after a few years it gets annoying, but that only makes it more effective. I've been listening to that ringtone for like 6 years now. Anyway. Okay, so.
My turn.
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, it's always been the same kind of balancing act. My family, I never told most of my family members. Actually, my little brother kind of figured it out and started calling me Tiger one day, which was interesting. But never felt a need, never had a reason to tell any of my family members, and I never had any reason to tell my friends or anything like that either. But the problem, it kind of goes back to what I was mentioning earlier. I isolated myself because of it. Completely closing myself away from everyone else because I didn't fit in isolated me, and it wasn't good. It actually did a lot of damage to me. So my mid-20s or so, I started trying to do the same thing. I started trying to figure out, okay, first off, what exactly am I? And the image that comes to mind is almost like when myself was being assembled, there's like this factory line that the bits and pieces of Zeph were, being pushed together on. And somehow just a little bit of Tiger gets kicked in there somehow. And it's like, okay, so this is who I am. I'm not human, and I'm not a tiger. I'm some kind of mixture. I'm something kind of in between. And kind of putting it into that perspective has been helpful. It kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier too. I try to figure out, like, how does this experience actually help me out now? Like, why is it important? Because it used to be almost paralyzing for me. It used to be very depressing. I used to use therianthropy as a reason to not do anything. I'm a mechanical engineer, so it's not something that has to hold you back. I found that more often than not, I personally was the thing that held myself back, because I thought, since I have since I'm a tiger too, I'm not supposed to be X, Y, or Z. I'm not supposed to be a successful human somehow. There are problems though, because, okay, engineering concepts, well, imagine if your brain has to translate from animal to human. That's not good. So fun stuff like performance anxiety too. And it's just, you have to face the issues as you go along. I am going through therapy to kind of help me, not because I'm a tiger, but to help me figure out how to human a little better too. Those who are around me that want to get closer, I don't tell them I'm a tiger. You know, I let them see the bits and pieces of me that are a tiger and let them formulate their own opinion. If it's important for me to say more specifically, then sure, I'll do it. But otherwise, I don't know. It's a part of who I am. I don't want to be like labeled as that specifically. There's more to me than that. It is a part of me. It is something that I have to work with and overcome. And it also has those moments where it helps me get through a lot of things that my peers can't seem to figure out how to get through. So it has its advantages too. So it seems like it's always been a balancing act. I guess is the best way that I can put it.
Yeah, that's exactly, that's the best way to put it, it is a balancing act.
It really is.
You know, work, home life, family, and you're dealing with the animal within. And sometimes it doesn't always work out the way you would like it to.
But that's life, no?
Yeah.
Any questions? I suppose not.
Suppose we can go over resources.
All
You
right.
mentioned that, so. I know for the Therian side of things, we have several forums. Therian Guide is a big site, stuff, forums and chats for the community. Whether you use Telegram or Discord, there are several chats on that. If I can give out the addresses more specifically afterwards, so if anyone wants to write them down, just come up after the panel and we'll give them out. YouTube channels, there are several good YouTube channels out there. Therian Nation, Wolf Daughter does a great series on Therian Trophy, breaking it down, all the different terms and shifts. She even does interviews and current events like panels like this one. She'll announce and advertise PALs, other gatherings. Therian Guide has the TT Radio.
Okay, so we've got the TT Radio, but we've also got the Therian Talks. It's sort of like our attempt at making a Therian podcast. It's new. Well, I guess we started around December or so. We've been interviewing staff members and we're moving on to other people within the community too. And we're also trying to kind of get the community feel for it. We want to be able to add to the library of resources for, you know, if someone's coming in, they either want more information or a different perspective, then they'll have that to tap into.
I also have at least one resource on YouTube. There is a YouTube channel called Azura Dragon Feather. I've seen a couple of their videos. They're pretty good. They're a resource for sure. I think so. Also, good resource if you're pagan stuff too. But they're a dragon king. But you know, Azura Dragon Feather. So there's that.
The main resource that I have is I run a Discord called Kitchenette that has really kind of all over a map, but we have Therian and Otherkin section. And that, actually the Otherkin section, Therian section isn't that big right now, but it's definitely something that I started with a website called Kitchenana like in 2006, and that kind of evolved into what the Discord is today. We just, we're more on the spiritual aspect of that side, and I will get into why in a little bit. Partially because Otherkin has a tendency to have more of a spiritual aspect because you can't, because there's a disparity of connecting a kin type that's part of mythology with a animal that you can pick up or hold the bones of. And the other part of it is because, okay, is it okay just to go straight into that? The other part of it is one of the things that I see the difference between spiritual Therianthropy and Otherkinism and the mental part of it is that I feel like in the mental part, you can only go back to the beginning of your birth to actually have a source of data for why you feel this way. And then that just isn't good enough for me. And I don't think it's good enough for a lot of people. I keep on having to ask why until I find a reason that actually makes sense. And to me, just watching a bunch of mermaids on TV and then feeling like you're a mermaid doesn't make sense. There's got to be a reason why you feel that way. I feel like we live in a world full of cause and effect. The effect is you feel like you're a mermaid. What's the cause? And once you find out what that cause is, that's probably the effect of something else. I mean, if you keep tracing that at the beginning of your life, you probably aren't going to find the first cause. Because, I mean, why do you feel like a fish if all you've ever been was human? So, I mean, but I do not think that the mental side or the spiritual side exclude each other. I think that people who have a history of being something possibly in previous lives, they have the mental part of that because of that history. Like, that's another reason why I believe that being Therian or being Otherkin, this is a life path for whether you recognize any kind of spiritual aspect to it or any kind of mental aspect. It becomes a life path because it becomes something that defines who you are, how you live, how you feel about things, and what you're going to do.
Indeed, whether you feel it is a spiritual, religious, mental, whatever you think the cause could be, whether you're into the pagan stuff, what have you, or not, one thing we know for sure is that you feel this way, and you can't help that. So you may as well try and figure out why, you know? No matter what, you still feel this way. So?
And honestly, finding out why, I not only do I believe it's good, I mean, it is even good, in my opinion, for humans to find out why and who they are in a more of a context than just this very lifetime. Like, I mean, I don't know if they can assume that they're just going to die and cease to exist, or that they have never existed before. So anybody looking at reality in it starts here, it ends here, I mean, is it a safe assumption to make that that's all there is? Or is it a safer assumption to make that there's maybe have been stuff before and maybe stuff later? And it may help explain why people feel the way they do, no matter what they are.
One thing I will say about the community, it's both online and off. You know, several of us are trying to get people more connected offline, to get to know each other better, and and understand each other better and work together in person, build a better, a stronger community. And if you're searching around online for both the Therian and the Otherkin community, you know, don't feel discouraged if you find a place that you don't fit in or you don't feel safe at. There's so many different sites out there, places out there online for people to connect with, that you will eventually find a place that feels comfortable to you. Search around, you know, research the different sites and chats. Find your place, because it is out there.
And definitely, don't feel a need to push yourself into a box. I kind of more like the forum format. Gives me more time to think about what I'm trying to get across and everything else. I know a lot of people don't like to perhaps spend that kind of time and detail into going into long paragraphs about what's, you know, trying to understand this part of the experience or this or that or the other. I know like Therian guides, you have to be approved at the site before you can participate on something like Discord. That doesn't mean you have to, you know, produce a research paper or anything like that to, you know, to be approved on the forums by any means. Just kind of get a feel for it and give it a chance. I know I personally, I first started poking around the Ware community around 2005, and I ran across a bunch of people that were grilling really intensely, and it made me very uncomfortable, and I left for about 10 years. So I promise you, like, things like that, they are not across the board. There are some servers that we know that will offer voluntary grilling.
Yes.
So if you want to kind of, you know, be tested in a sense to see if you can figure out more about yourself or validate your experience a little more, that's an option there. There's no need to see one aspect of the community and feel like you need to be isolated altogether. I just encourage you to go out there, preferably, you know, try to join a few parts of the community and see which ones stick.
Yeah, because we're all in this together, you know. We gotta help out each other as the community.
Yes.
As relation to the whole grilling thing, yeah, that used to be a practice. I kind of discovered my own Therianthropy in the 90s, and grilling was the primary tactic and test for. That's how the community tested to see if other people were legitimately Therians, and it did more damage back then than good. But the only reason I'm going there is because I want to say, do not be afraid to be wrong. This is going to be a discovery that I have personally have found will last your life. It is a life path that once you have, for one thing, most people feel it before they even know what it is. What they're looking to explain it for themselves first. And once they have a word for it, once they can put a name to it, once they discover that Therianthropy and Otherkin, this is a thing that people are, now they want to find out what. But you start with when you're born, you don't know anything. When you're 11, you may have never encountered a fox before in your life. So how do you know if you are one? That's something that you only learn through interaction with other people, making comparisons, having other people help you get more information. And that's another thing. Don't ever let anybody tell you who or what you are. But if people bring in suggestions and tell you what they say, maybe you can take that into account when you're, because this is how you build context. There are millions upon millions of different animals in the world. Which one are you, and how are you going to find out with all of those millions? And let's not, that's just the theory, that's just the animals that we know.
Also, it should be noted that going to the zoo can be a good way to get an idea of things. everyone go to the zoo.
One of the ways that I figured out I was a fox is like, well, I have these cat-like attributes, and I have these dog-like attributes. What is a cat dog? And it was like,
Fox. It's
yeah,
the middle
pretty
ground.
much. It's what do you call it? Cat software on dog hardware.
Yeah.
Is that thing, as
Yep,
they
that's
say.
exactly what it is.
With skunk malware.
What's going on? Yeah, sounds about right.
So yes, definitely don't be afraid to be wrong. Don't afraid to listen to other people. Don't let them tell you what you are. In fact, most people who will come out and do this, I've seen this before, reading sessions where they look at you and say, oh, this is what you look like. I believe that's a dangerous road to go down. That's letting somebody take over what you are going to decide as is your identity. That's really something you can only determine for yourself.
Yeah, I don't.
Don't
really-
let anyone tell you that they have all the answers,
Yes.
because they don't.
A
Yeah,
person that
it
says
may
that they-
sound easy, but it's not that easy.
I've been, I found out over 20 years ago that I was a Therian, and I've been active in the community off and on, helped out a lot of people, answered a lot of questions, but I personally, I'll admit, I still don't know it all. And, it's a learning process as you go through life, discovering what we are, and sometimes that changes. Like a couple of years ago, I'm more of a spiritual Therian. Badger came into my life and turned my life around 180. So I finally accepted that, and here I am. I'm still going.
By the way, this is just a random question. Are you like a European badger or like American badger?
The American Badger.
I like European badgers more. I like their markings. There was a time when I identified with them too, and it was a European one, so.
To me, I think it still goes back to being honest with yourself too. While I do agree that you should never have someone else tell you what you are or what you are not, you also kind of need to be open-minded and willing to explore some possibilities too. If you set up a wall, there's a chance that you will miss out on learning experiences. I'm facing some questions myself. I think you've faced questions.
Yeah.
You're not going to learn, and you again may actually cause more distress for yourself if you just go in, you're hard-headed. It's again that balancing act. Don't be a pushover by any means, but don't be too stubborn either, because it might hurt you. And then
Yeah, a lot of the early experience that I had in grilling gave me a mentality throughout pretty much most of the 2000s that I'm a fox, I know that much, but if I tell anybody that I might be any more than a fox, then I'm taking a risk of rejection by the community. And
Yeah, like
honestly,
fairy fox can sound a little far-fetched, but.
yeah, and honestly, in the old days, in the 2000s, yeah, I would say that there was a risk, but most of that is, the community has become much more accepting in the last decade or so.
There's even a place for those weird fiction kin, I'm sure. I've
There
never
is.
seen it, but I know it's there. Fiction kin got somewhere.
With the grilling and stuff, it's like, you don't want to be too fiery and just burn them to a crisp, but you don't want to be so open-minded and all accepting either. You have to have, like we keep saying, it's a balancing act. You have to have a little bit of doubt, and there has to be that line. But one of the servers I run, we call one of the channels the Therian Grill, jokingly. But people, it's all voluntarily. People will come in and ask to be grilled or want some insight on something. And
Well, just for reference, for anyone who doesn't know what grilling is, can we explain what grilling is? 'Cause some might not know.
yeah, grilling is basically asking questions, trying to get. Back in the day, it seemed more like they wanted to get answers from you for themselves. These days, gatekeeping basically,
Yeah.
if everyone's familiar with that.
Ah,
These days, we try to, they want to be asked questions, and we will ask questions to help the individual discover more about themselves. Maybe offer some insight from an outside viewpoint that they hadn't thought about at the time. You know, helping each other, finding each other, it is, you know, we're trying to be more community minded, and have an effort as a whole together to help each other out, be there for each other in times of when that internal strife that a lot of us feel at times.
I think that's one of the things that, you know, again, a few years ago, it was very damaging for the community to have certain types of grilling. Myself, I had gone through trauma that was not related to the therianthropy. And again, I rejected my inner critter for a very long time. So when I tried to find a part of the community that I was comfortable in, again, the grilling that I experienced, it was even beyond like, prove to us that you are what you are. I was already not comfortable with who I was. I was trying to find a place for myself where I didn't feel like a weirdo or an outcast or like I was, you know, wrong or something else like that. And the methods that the people used were very damaging to me. Again, I left for 10 years. Where would I be now if I had those 10 years of support instead of that rejection and that denial? So it's very important, I think, now that I'm on the other side and I have, you know, some people look up at me or look up to me, and I think it's important that when I try to, like when I see some kind of habits with them, I don't want them to think that I'm attacking them, their identity or anything else. They are the only ones who will know. They're the only ones who can know who they are or can do that exploration. So, you know, if you see someone that maybe needs some of that guidance, just be cautious on how you approach it. Again, it can be very detrimental if you do it the wrong way, but it can also be very helpful if you do it in the right way. So just show support. Don't let them feel like you're trying to bully them or trying to change them or anything else like that.
We have 5 minutes left, so.
Well, does anyone have any questions?
Any questions, or I guess we can just open it up if you want to talk about anything, get any
Is
information.
there anything coming in on after this?
I don't know.
There was a panel at 3:30.
Alright, and I'm fine with going until they come in and want it.
Alright.
Especially because I was late.
Yeah.
Humility.
Yeah. Oh, come on. It's not that bad. We get it.
Yeah, there's a little bit of leeway, there's like a half an hour between panels.
Alright.
Well, in that case, yeah, does anyone want to chat? Like, anyone want to say anything, talk about anything, questions?
Share your experiences, again, questions,
Yeah,
anything
share
that
your
we said
experiences,
that
Mike.
you want to elaborate on.
I would like to plug the Therian timeline. There is a good bit of research out on therianthropy. It's not just the IARP. There's a British outfit called the TRG, the Therian Research Group. And there have been a lot of people that has done dissertations and stuff for their doctorate, their master's degree and things like that. And all that stuff's accessible online. I try to collect as much of that as I can find and condense it onto that website. So that's the Therian timeline, which also has a timeline of history in it.
Okay, anyone else? Oh, good years.
Yeah. Can I get the list of resources?
Yeah, just if anyone wants to come on up, we'll share them with you here.
Yeah, alright, cool.
I'm going to take this off so people won't
Okay, good.
unconsensually